Character assassination and blatant lies are commonplace in political campaigns. When battling to win an election, politicians often resort to tactics purposely designed to manipulate the voters into believing falsehoods. In this presidential race of 2012, however, one might wonder if there's not a conscious desire to turn off the voting public to the entire process. In this respect, the GOP campaign of 2012 is exceptional. It has devolved into a dark, amoral ooze void of principles and toxic to international peace. In this presidential race, GOP candidate Mitt Romney has lowered the bar of ethics to a new and all-time low. By criticizing President Obama in the midst of the Benghazi crisis in Libya, Romney reproached calm dialogue to politicize a dangerous issue. Romney's political aspirations displaced any genuine concern for human life. And then, to kindle the flames of ire among his most ardent supporters, he characterized the sitting president as a terrorist sympathizer. Such conduct is more than reprehensible. It is dangerous. Falsely accusing the president and other Americans of treason is an incorrigible act, one that should be evaluated carefully at this time. Many pundits merely describe his behavior as ignorant and amateurish, but upon closer scrutiny, odious behavior of this nature is cunning and insidious, with ramifications that need to be assessed. Romney's political campaign shames the dignity of those who risk their lives, those who have lost loved ones, and those who are dedicated to championing the cause of peace among Muslims in fragile nations, nations that have recently revolted against brutal dictatorships. Reckless conduct that encourages distrust and bigotry towards all Muslims should be rooted out and condemned. To criticize anyone for declaring their disapproval for hate propaganda is suspicious at best. Mr. Romney lacks the moral compass and decency to understand the struggle occurring in these regions. His specious demands for greater control are troublesome. Most Americans, and certainly the world community, abhors his soundbite bring it on cavalier rhetoric, so reminiscent of the Bush administration following 9/11 and throughout the Iraq War. Supported by 17 out of 24 of the same advisors used by former President George Walker Bush, Romney's conduct is not surprising. One can only imagine the instructions he is receiving from them. Roll up your sleeves, put on your dungarees, and ride into the Badlands of the Middle East, waving the American flag high. Observing the Michigan-born elitist prancing before the world pretending to be another fast-shooting gunslinger ready to save the world from Muslim terrorists does not sit well with most Americans who witnessed the staging of the misguided war in Iraq. Will Americans allow themselves to be fooled again? For some, the Romney platform is an opportunity to initiate the next war in the Middle East. The outcome of Romney's irresponsible and failing election campaign may cost many lives, even if he is not elected. Of course, the creators of Romney's undefined foreign policy are his wealthy cronies, the international syndicate known as the military-industrial complex, composed of all those corporations and billionaires who profit from waging war. Romney has been selected to replace George Walker Bush Jr. as the next puppet willing to carry out their deadly charade. It is by no accident that the unpopular former president, George W. Bush, remains in the shadows, not to be seen with Romney. By harnessing and cultivating fear and hatred, a war with Iran may soon become inevitable. The threat is more than plausible, because this world is infected with hatred and bigotry, and these are the dark forces most widely used to galvanize and to promote the agenda of the current GOP platform. Even if Romney loses the election, the groundwork for inciting another war is now in progress. Romney's ties with right-wing Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has already impeded President Obama's efforts to prevent a war with Iran. President Barack Obama and Defense Secretary Clinton rightfully denounced the disgusting hate film that was used to infuriate Muslims. Any decent human being, whether Christian, Muslim, or Jew, who values peace and human life would strongly condemn propaganda designed to create violence and more bigotry. Sadly, Mr. Romney failed to condemn this hate film. His selfish pursuit of the presidency has caused him to turn a blind eye to the most important values. In Romney's desperate desire to seek power, he has chosen to cultivate the lowest common denominator found among human motives, fear and hate. The president, most Americans, and most people throughout the world condemn the violence of terrorism, in addition to condemning the spread of hate propaganda. Justice demands seeking the individuals responsible for violent acts, not blaming all Muslims, and recklessly targeting innocent parties for failing to police the world adequately. Though many of us are rightly concerned about the rising power of corporatism in both political parties, we should be extremely careful not to assume that the election process will reflect accurately the sentiment of our nation and its best interests. Our election process is damaged. This may be the last hope Romney has of taking over the White House. By the nature of his recent attacks, one must assume that he has resigned himself to representing only the extreme right-wing fringe of the GOP party. Unable to summon enough widespread support as shown in the polls, why would he choose this narrow course? It appears that he has surrendered to the belief that he must rely upon voter suppression and fraud to win this election. In many states, the voting process has been compromised. By proffering the absurd notion that President Obama's birth certificate is invalid, the Kansas GOP election board is attempting to delete the president's name from the ballot. This unprecedented abuse of power is occurring in several states, wherever the GOP maintains control over state elections. Voter suppression, as planned in several key swing states, has been under construction for months, making it difficult for many citizens to obtain proper voter identification. Primarily targets poor and ethnic voters who predominantly vote Democratic. Limiting the time to vote prior to Election Day is another tactic designed to thwart the working poor from casting their votes. Some employers will use this opportunity to manipulate the tired and poor wage earners, knowing that many will retreat from standing on overcrowded lines. Impoverished middle-class Americans are under fire in this country. The GOP has made their position clear. They do not want to see a large turnout at the polls this year. They do not care about democratic values of free elections. They want control without interference from the people. Americans must not assume that President Obama can actually win by a small margin. In this upcoming election, voting fraud and suppression may have to be nullified by a record turnout. Only the voting public can dismantle the power of those electronic voting machines privately owned by GOP corporations. The key swing states, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, have become targets for this kind of trickery. We have arrived at a treacherous turning point in this country. The process of purging voters and tallying votes has become fertile ground for political corruption in the United States. This sad fact must be addressed and faced if a free nation is someday going to emerge. The working poor must step forward and become the champions of democracy on Election Day. The opportunity and time to vote may be well limited throughout many voting districts in the nation. Populated areas will likely experience overcrowding. These conditions will impede voting, especially near low-income urban centers in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. With awareness of this upcoming challenge, we hope that single working mothers, women, young voters, the elderly, and the poor will not fall prey to the GOP machine that is presently trying to alienate them and lull them into indifference. It is incumbent on American voters to demonstrate this last vestige of power, or corporate totalitarianism will soon become a one-branch governing body. Mr. Romney and the GOP do not want Americans to show up en masse at the polls this November, because the only way they may be able to win this election is by relying on their base of right-wing zealots and voter suppression. If Americans do show up at the polls, however, President Obama will win by a landslide. It is up to you. Get out the vote. This is Spadecaller.